which is the better answer to suffering, the Christian answer or atheism, allowing some holes in either case. Let's be generous to each other. Atheism says your life is completely irrelevant. To go, suffering, yeah, it's inconvenient to you, but there's nothing wrong about it. It's nothing wrong about somebody dying. That's just the way the universe works. In fact, actually, it's evolution in action. So for all we know, your son's friend, for all we know, he had some genetic condition that would have polluted the gene pool, and Mother Nature actually did the human race a favor by finishing him off. I mean, that's horrific, all of that kind of basket of things. Over here, we have Christianity that says that actually, if we want to, if you think that you're upset about the death of your friend, God is even more upset.
Hey, everybody, this is Jeff Allen. Welcome to Who Gave Jeff Allen a Podcast. We're looking for you. There's 6 billion of you out there. We're going to find you. And we're going to hold you accountable for this debacle we call a podcast. And today's guest, well, first of all, I would like to say to the people out there, my movie, our movie, I hate saying my movie. All I did was deliver lines in it. There was a whole crew behind it and the actresses that really carried me along, Candace Kirkpatrick and Kate Larson. My 7 Grandmas is on Amazon Prime. You have to, you can't just put my name in for whatever reason. The algorithm doesn't identify me with the movie, so you have to type in the number 7 Grandmas. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Watch the movie, and negative, positive, it all moves the algorithm, and that's all we're looking for. And please subscribe to this podcast. Just it's up there somewhere, wherever. And let's grow this thing. Nordic Wave, my only sponsor, is a cold plunge, and it turns out none of you people want to dip in cold water because we haven't sold one in over a year. So not exactly. We're looking for actual sponsors that pay. So it would be nice if you have a product that we could push that's more affordable. We would love to have you. Maybe a hot plunge. Maybe we could sell a hot plunge. The Nordic Wave. Anyway, today's guest, I have been looking forward to this. I met Dr. Andy Bannister a number of years ago when he was with another organization, and I just really, really love this man. He's engaging, he's smart. I love people that are smart and have a sense of humor and don't take themselves all that seriously. Dr. Andy Bannister is a Christian apologist, and we can explain to you what that actually is. Speaker and Director of Solas Center for Public Christianity. With a PhD in Islamic Studies, Andy has spent years engaging skeptics, which I belong to, atheists, I belonged to that for a while, and people of other faiths in conversations about Christianity, speaking everywhere from universities to churches to media outlets around the world. He has taught extensively on Islam and philosophy and is passionate about helping everyday Christians talk about Jesus without sounding weird, angry, or afraid. When he's not debating the big question, he enjoys hiking, mountain climbing, photography, and spending time with his wife and 2 children in England. He is kind enough to join us from England, and everybody asks this question: what time is it where you're at? I'm going to guess 6 hours from here, right?
Yeah, I could return the favor. What time is it for you, Jeff? So
9:11.
It is 10 past 3.
Oh, okay.
Kind of in the afternoon, and it's quite hot. We've got a heat wave going on, so quite frankly, I quite like the idea of a cold plunge pool, but I probably not the thing to buy, not outside my budget.
Yeah, it's a big Yeti cup is all it is. It's a big plastic cup that I sit in the...
Maybe you should have sold more if you'd renamed the podcast. I don't know, Jeff Allen's Cold Plunge or something.
Cold Plunge, there you go. And then I would just draw people who enjoy dipping in cold water. They would.
That's exactly it.
Let me ask you this. You told me a story years ago of how you got into all of this. You were a young lad, and I
still am a young lad. Hey,
what is the place in London where you go stand on a box and just debate?
Yeah. So my journey into talking publicly about my faith and doing all the kind of crazy stuff I've been doing for the past 15 years, Jeff. So it started at a place in London called Speaker's Corner. So that's part of Hyde Park, big park in the middle of London. And at Speaker's Corner, it's been going for, I don't know, well over 100 years. And particularly on a weekend, you can go down there and stand on a box or a step ladder, and you can talk about anything: religion, politics, sport. You get a crowd. And a friend of mine was going to witness to reach out to Muslims, because lots of Muslims go there to talk about Islam. And my friend Jay, who is actually American living over here at the time, went, well, why don't we just go and preach to the preachers? And he sort of tricked me. I was supposed to be going down to Speaker's Corner to see it, and the first day I went, he had a spare ladder, and he was like, come on, get on a ladder, you know. And I went, I've never spoken on the street. He went, any idiot can do it. I said, I've never talked to a Muslim. He went, oh, they're easy. Both those statements, Jeff, were utterly wrong, because I got up on that ladder and the Muslims then knew what they were doing, and they took me to pieces. And it took about 3 months of really working hard to be able to feel that I had begun to get a grip and be able to kind of engage well. But I loved it. It's a bit... Somebody once said, and you know, that the Speaker's Corner in some ways is a bit like stand-up comedy, kind of, right, which is your area, right? Because there's that excitement. Yeah, you can go in a studio and record something, and it's more controlled, but you kind of get out there and it's uncontrolled, and you don't know what's coming, and gosh, it's quite scary, but it's also quite exciting as well. And you really, in the Speaker's Corner thing, you can, I think, sense God at work, because you're having to. You really feel I've got to pray, because if the Holy Spirit doesn't turn up, I'm toast.
Yeah. And did your parents think you got dropped on your head or something? Why would you do that? Were your parents into, obviously they were believers as well?
Yeah. So I was raised in a good Baptist family, and so, which is better than a bad Baptist family. And so raised in a good Baptist family, and interesting. I mean, I loved going to church as a kid, but I didn't, I aged about 12, 13 was when I realized this is my mum and dad's faith, not my faith. And I really kind of sort of felt that was the time when, you know, God wanted me to sort of decide for myself, is this stuff true? And so I did that age, 12, 13. And then, didn't really think, I think about the more intellectual kind of explaining, engaging my faith with others until, my mid-20s. So I think my parents, bless them, they're still both alive. And I think they would say they're both proud of what I do, which is amazing. It's nice to have parents who are proud of what you do,
right,
but also look at it and go, what is he doing? I mean, why would you do that? Why would you go and stand in front of a bunch of, Muslims who want to do nothing and throw questions at you?
And that's nice that it was just
But
questions.
I'm very grateful to them.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful.
And is that what led you to Islamic studies, to get your PhD?
Yeah. So what happened at Speaker's Corner was I began kind of reading, basically, Jeff. When I went back from that first time at Speaker's Corner, really kind of my head reeling, thinking, man, is there like nothing I can say to defend my faith? They seem to have everything. But I went to the local Christian bookstore next day, and the guy behind the counter heard my story, and he said, well, Andy, what you need apologetics, that word that you said in the opener. He said, you need apologetics. I never heard that word. So I said, well, what is that? It sounds like a breakfast cereal, quite frankly. But no, it's not. As you know, it's the branch of Christian theology concerned with giving reasons why we think these things to be true. So he sold me a few books, and I read, went back to Speaker's Corner with answers to a lot of the questions, and just got a whole load of new questions. But for the next 3 months, I would go to Speaker's Corner on the weekend and then kind of read during the week. And what that did, I hadn't come from an intellectual kind of family, or certainly not a university going family. My dad was a teacher, but he'd kind of learnt on the job the way he did in the old days. They just threw you in a classroom and gave you a book and a sharp stick, and it was sink or swim. And so after about sort of 2-3 years of this, really beginning feeling God sort of laying on my heart, no, you need to study this more seriously. And we kind of prayed about it and gave it a go. So I went and did an undergraduate degree to start with in theology and philosophy, but then carried on through and went into doing a PhD and did the PhD in Islamic studies. Because one of the interesting things about Islam is Christianity has generally, we've had our moments where we've gone wrong, but mostly throughout history, Christians have looked at the tough questions. They haven't run from the tough questions. They've kind of leaned into them and gone, okay, let's explore this. Islam, by contrast, has tended to go, there's a tough question, right, you mustn't ask it. And so vast amounts of information and stuff about early Islam, we just don't know. So if you want to do a PhD and do some original research, there's so many things you can dig into. So I did some work looking at the origins of the Quran and had a blast. And that kind of set me up then for the job I'm doing now.
Well, that's great. You tell a book. Is this your most recent book, How to Talk About Jesus Without Sounding Like an Idiot? I love the title.
Well, just on the title, I mean, I love the title too.
Did you wrestle with the publisher on the title at all? Or did you
I could say that with with all confidence, with no sort of fear of like lack of humility, because I didn't come up with the title. I'm terrible at titles, Jeff. I think I can write all right, but titles I just go to pieces. And it had some ridiculously long, unwieldy title. And the publisher, I think, just said to me something like, well, it must be a better title. And then I went, well, I did once do a seminar in Alberta, Canada, called How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot. And the publisher, Tyndale out of Chicago, were like, that's it. That is the title. We're using that, not this like monstrosity that you've got. And it really worked. It's not the most recent book, funnily enough. I'm 2 books beyond there.
Oh my gosh.
Now. Yeah, I know. Amazing, right? So I did a book called, he says, reaching over off his desk. I did a book called Have You Ever Wondered a couple of years ago, which I co-wrote with 9 friends. So that was really fun. That's basically 28 really short chapters designed for folks who are not Christian but not angry skeptics. They're interested in spiritual things. They just haven't put all the story together. And it begins with things like, have you ever wondered why we get passionate about justice? Have you wondered why we love music? Have you wondered why stories move us? And the list goes on. And it looks at 28 of these little clues to a bigger story and then leads them all together and says that, hey, maybe the Christian faith actually explains all those things you care about. And then last year I did an update of the first book I did that I think you may have seen this one, The Atheist Didn't Exist, which is my kind of comedy apologetics deal with atheism book. So we updated it and rewrote it totally and stuck 2 new big chapters on, looking at what happened to the new atheism. 15 years ago, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Dan Dennett, they were like rock stars. Right. Now they're like they're either dead or decrepit.
You don't
what
see
happened?
much.
Where did it go wrong? Yeah. And then we also looked at why is there this great awakening in belief in God again. I know the US is lagging a little bit behind the UK on this, but the UK, we've hit peak secular. We hit peak secular about 2-3 years ago. And I saw some recent stat now, only 13% of under 25s in the UK are atheist. Vast majority of young people are discovering faith again. Now, they're not all discovering Christianity. There's a lot of work to do. You've got an awful lot of spiritual but not religious, awful lot of there must be something. But you're not hearing this kind of, there is no God, get on and enjoy your life.
Well, that's funny. The guy that discipled me cracked my mind by just saying, why don't you're not smart enough to be an atheist. Why don't you just go for agnosticism?
I love that.
And I said something, what does that mean? He goes, well, that's proving my point. If you don't know what the word agnosticism means, you probably can't understand the entire workings of the universe. So just crack your mind is what he said to me. Open it up.
I, Jeff, meet a lot of people. I don't know if you run into these folks. I meet a lot of people who think they're atheists, but within about 15 seconds, they're agnostic. Where I often get it is someone says, oh, they're an atheist. So I say, oh, so you believe, the universe came from nothing. You believe you believe that you're worth nothing more than any other collection of atoms, be that a table, a chair, or a dog turd. And you believe that when we die, you go in the ground and you're worm food. And then one day the sun's going to expand and wipe everything out. And it's all toast. So is that what you believe? And usually I get, oh gosh, no. There has to be more than that. Right. So you're probably not an atheist then. You're probably, as you say, an agnostic or a curious but open. We get a lot of that over here, particularly younger people. A lot of university students are in that kind of, they're curious, they're intrigued.
Well, I love to hear that.
They want to know more.
I love to hear that. I think that's happening here in the States as well. They had a kind of a revival in Kentucky last year or the year before that went on for weeks at a church, just this big prayer meeting. People started coming in from all over the country to keep, people would leave, people would come, and it was all young people. And I just think that it doesn't take a lot of self-reflection to look around and go, I think we've been sold a bill of goods. There has to be more.
Yeah.
And that would create the curiosity, and then at least the answers are out there. And your book, I love I'm on the what and why chapters right now in the book, the questions that we ask, what and why. Expound on that. I also wanted to talk about the original apology. The way I look at it, the original, it's not the original. I mean, the apologists have been around for centuries. But,
they have a bit, yeah.
Yeah, but and C.S. Lewis is probably the one that even non-believers may have heard of, C.S. we were talking off air a little bit about this. I had a hard time understanding. What I love about your work and the way you write is that it's for somebody that's a layman like me. It's accessible and understandable, and you don't need a degree in Islamic studies to understand these.
I was going to say that's my one regret. Whenever people ask me that story, you ask me, is it makes it sound like you need a PhD to talk about ordinary stuff. But the other thing as well, I mean, we probably talked about this at some point when our paths used to cross in person. One thing that's helped, and it's very kind of you to say that, is I think a couple of things really helped for me. One was coming up I did my first kind of 6 or 7 years working like out in the kind of regular job, nothing to do with church stuff. I worked for a local hospital for six or 7 years. So you just learn to hang out with ordinary people and talk in a way that makes sense. Then I did 3 years of doing kind of youth work. And that taught me, if you can't explain an idea so that a 12 or 13-year-old can understand it, go back and try again. And then also I did a bit of stand-up comedy. So my first ever public speaking was doing magic and stand-up comedy in my late teens.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. Magic.
Going around kind of scout meetings, old people's homes and, doing stuff. And it was probably totally, utterly rubbish. But again, you learn to think on your feet.
Right.
And you learn to kind of move fast when things go badly wrong. Like when a card trick goes wrong, you've got to quickly like backfill before you look like an idiot. And that helps. Yes, I was going to say that. So the big idea in the book, in a nutshell, is that sometimes for Christians listening to this, I don't know, how much of a mixed audience you have, but like for Christians listening to this stuff, probably most of us have run into that problem of going, we think we want to talk to our friends and our colleagues and our family about Jesus. We know we should do. We feel guilty we don't do enough of it. And often what holds us back is fear of what might go wrong, and then feeling we need to have all these expert like knowledge and answers worked out before God can use us. And then you go to the Bible and go, well, do you know what? The greatest communicator we have in the Bible and in history is Jesus. And Jesus spends most of his time asking questions. He asks 307 questions in the Gospels. So maybe one takeaway from Jesus is, what about if we thought more about questions and less about like downloading stuff onto people? And so in the book, I teach 4 questions, and you've mentioned the first 2. So what do you mean by that question? Just does what it says on the tin. If someone throws something at you, just pick up on something they've said and dig into it. So if someone says to you, I'm an atheist, just start by going, well, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? When you say atheist, what do you mean? And you can use it in other faiths too. Someone says, I'm a Muslim, I believe in God. Oh, that's interesting. When you say God, what do you mean? Tell me the God that you believe in. And suddenly you've got a conversation going,
right? And
you haven't had to learn vast amounts of information. You're just digging into their story. And normally if we do that, you find if you listen to the other person and ask questions and show that you're listening, they are probably going to be very open, or even they'll turn to you and say, so what do you think, Jeff? Because you've listened to them. You haven't gone banging them over the head with the Bible. So that's what do you mean by that question?
Right.
And why do you think that question is just very similar? If someone says something, you ask them to give the reasons. So if someone says, I can't believe in religion, science has disproven God, again, you might get scared by that and go, how do I answer that question? Or what if you just started by going, that's a really interesting idea. Just out of interest, why do you think that? What is it that you've read or studied that's kind of led you to that conclusion? And one or two things will happen. Either you find they've got nothing. They've got absolutely nothing. They were on YouTube and they saw, I don't know, Ricky Gervais said it in a comedy set or something, and they're just repeating it. And you've exposed they've got nothing. Or they'll tell you a bit more, and now you're getting to the underlying kind of issue. And sometimes things go off in weird directions. I've had examples where someone perhaps raised the science question, and I've asked, so tell me, why do you think that? And they've gone, well, it's obvious, right? Because, how can God be good when there's suffering in the world? Oh, interesting. So we're not actually talking about science. Your big issue is that, you just lost a loved one and you're angry at God. So you started on science, but that's not the real issue.
Right.
And questions get you there, right?
Yeah. And one of the things you said in the book that cracked me up was the employee that brings the Bible to work and has the thickest, fattest Bible they can find, and on the wooden stand, and and
the wooden eagle kind of stand,
the wooden eagle stand, yeah. And I just it's interesting. I think the opposite of that is true in most places.
It is, isn't it?
Most people are afraid to come out of the closet because they don't feel adequate enough to answer those questions. And one of the things you said in the book that I found it's true is to say, I don't know the answer to that, but if you don't mind, I will look it up. I guarantee you there's an answer. I used to tell my son that when he would come to me when he was walking away from the faith. And I said, son, I don't have an answer to that, but give me a week and let me look it up. And I said, trust me, that's not a new question. There's no new questions. There's no new responses. Yeah. And I agree with you. I think a lot of people walk away from. My son walked away because a friend of his died, 19 years old. And his friend was very funny. 13 years old, he'd come in the house and go, Mr. Jeff, I'm an atheist. And I would repeat what my friend told me. You're not smart enough to be an atheist, Austin. So
I hadn't heard that line. That's a really
I'm sorry. Good line. You're just not there. You're not there yet intellectually, but you could be, just keep working at it. So anyway, he died tragically in a glacier he was a hiker, and he was hiking a glacier in New Zealand, I think, or somewhere out there. And he fell into a crevice with 2 other guys, and they were down there for 8-10 hours before he passed away. And my son comes to me and he says, Dad, is Austin in hell now? And I said, well, first of all, heaven and hell are not my domain. But I said, here's the good news. We looked it up on the New Zealand media covered it, and those 2 boys that he was down there with for 10 hours were Bible-believing Christians.
So there's every chance
So you have no idea what was discussed. And I can tell you this, there's a truism in life. There are no atheists in foxholes. So when you're looking death right in the eye, and I said, so rest assured that I guarantee you those boys discussed it with them. And your friend may be a chance for you to see him again, but you don't know that. So, don't. But he walked away. He could not reconcile why God would allow that, And so that is a big one. Your friend John Lennox had a really great YouTube video on suffering and death.
John
he
has. John's got some great stuff. Yeah. I think the other thing, Jeff, and you may have said this as well. I think the suffering question is really tough, isn't it? Because it combines things. It's not just an intellectual answer. Sometimes it's not even an intellectual issue. It's a heart kind of issue. So you're trying to balance a pastoral response and a spot of counseling and all that other stuff with the question. What I have found helpful, and again, this ties in actually to your point about saying I don't know. I think that the older I get nervous about sometimes Christian answers to tough questions where we give the impression that we know everything.
Right.
And so on the suffering question, I'm much more comfortable now saying things like, look, I don't have every answer to suffering, kind of thing. And I think Christians have some questions to answer. I said, but let's rephrase it this way. Which is the better answer to suffering? The Christian answer or atheism, allowing some holes in either case. Let's be generous to each other. Atheism says your life is completely irrelevant. To go suffering, it's inconvenient to you, but there's nothing wrong about it. It's nothing wrong about somebody dying. That's just the way the universe works. In fact, actually, it's evolution in action. So for all we know, your son's friend, for all we know, he had some genetic condition that would have polluted the gene pool, and Mother Nature actually did the human race a favor by finishing him off. I mean, that's horrific. All of that kind of basket of things. Over here, we have Christianity that says that actually, if we want to, if you think that you're upset about the death of your friend, God is even more upset. God is even more angry at death and injustice. And we know that because God paid the price of Jesus to deal with it. Now, why that means your particular friend fell into that particular crevice on that particular day, I can't answer that question. But I can tell you that the suffering isn't irrelevant, that his life wasn't irrelevant, and that God cares deeply. And that I also believe there's coming a time where there will be no more suffering and no more death and no more pain. Have I still got some questions? Yes, absolutely. But I'm much more comfortable with that answer than the atheist one, even though I still have some gaps. And I think as Christians, we need to be comfortable going, sometimes our answer only gets us so far, but it still gets us a long way.
Right, and you're right when you say that you're dealing with a I don't want to say psychological issue, but there's an existential part of that where, especially if the wound is still raw. My father pounded the table for years. It's very, very funny. He would when he found out I became a believer, he would throw out these things. He never once asked me why. Probably the most profound decision I've ever made in my life, and never bothered to ask why. But he would throw out these things. Every hair on your head is numbered, and I go, it is. Leave it at a crime scene. Yeah, but he used the suffering, as his. I don't want to call it a crutch for atheism, but that's certainly what he used to justify his atheism. I believe, in hindsight, he was harmed at church as a young boy by somebody. There was a wound. There was a wound so deep in there that
the wound, exactly.
Yeah.
The interesting thing as well, I always think with the suffering piece is the other thing that shows that, with every respect to your father, it's not that simple. Is if it were that simple, everyone who suffered, you'd expect to naturally become atheists. But that's not what happens. Some people do. Some people lose their faith, but others don't. There was an amazing book written I want to say 20 years ago now. There was a psychiatrist did a study looking at people who'd lived through the Holocaust, who'd been inside the camps. It was called The Faith and Doubt of Holocaust Survivors. And it's interesting because he's looking more at Judaism than Christianity. So I've got an axe to grind in that particular battle. But what was interesting, he looked at what happened to people's faith. And so it was interesting. Some people lost their faith inside Auschwitz, the experiences they'd been through. They came out and they walked away. Other people, ironically, lost their faith not inside Auschwitz, but after, because they'd hoped that when they were released, everything would go back to normal. And there is no normal after suffering like that. And so the expectation gap was the problem. Lots of other people held on to their faith, but the most amazing category, some people came to faith through Auschwitz. They came to faith inside the camps because there was that sense of realizing if there is no God, there's actually nothing wrong with what the Third Reich are doing. If there is no God, you can do exactly as you want because the universe doesn't care. There is no justice. There's just us. And actually that realization for many people was the light bulb moment. And yes, people would still protest against God. And by the way, protesting against suffering and shouting at God is not new. Go read the Psalms.
Right.
But it's the fact that if there is no God, there's no one to shout at. You've got an empty universe that doesn't care any more for you than it does for the life of a gnat. So I think, yes, Christians, help our friends, listen to our friends, share some things, but also say, look, rather than look for what's the magic bullet answer, let's think about which answer is the most coherent and know that we may not get all the way, but we can get a long part of the way.
Yeah. So what was the first question that made you realize I need to get, when you were on that soapbox? How did you start?
The first question the most common questions,
apologist? Okay, Muslims, I'm here, and I'm gonna dazzle you with my.
Oh my word!
Yeah. Now, were you cocky?
Well,
were you cocky? I mean, were you like confident in what you thought you knew?
Oh, it wasn't. Well, not at first. At first, it was a disaster.
We don't know what we don't know. So how long did it take you to realize you don't know a lot?
Oh, that took me about 30 seconds when I first went to Speaker's Corner and they fired questions. And I went, "Oh, hello, we're not in Kansas anymore because I've got no idea how to deal with those ones." Then it took, as I said earlier, about 3 to 4 months of kind of really hard work to get to grips. And then I think I hit the dangerously cocky phase where you're like, "Well, I've mastered it now. I've been going to Speaker's Corner for 6 months. I know what I'm doing." And I think two dangers with that. One is that you sometimes come across somebody who had a new question and you look like an idiot. But the other, Jeff, looking back, if I could give some advice to my 25-year-old self, is you start treating people as if you're trying to win the argument, not the person. Because you'd hear a question and go, right, I've got this one, I can sort this guy out. Rather than going, no, my job is to persuade this guy.
Right.
And maybe I need to slow down just a little bit and be willing to just listen. And sometimes, by the way, be willing to walk away. One of the most amazing lessons I ever saw in that wasn't at a Speaker's Corner, but there's a really quite well-known American apologist. I'm sure you've heard of him, William Lane Craig. Very well-known. Yeah. So Bill is an amazing philosopher, one of the world's top philosophers. I mean, not just in Christian philosophy, but one of the world's top philosophers. I remember him being over here in the UK about 15 years ago, doing a debate at Sheffield University. He was debating a guy called A.C. Grayling, very well-known British philosopher and very hardcore atheist. And it was a formal debate. So you had like your opening statements, your main statements, your closing statements. By the time we got to the end of the main statements, Bill was winning. I mean, his arguments were more persuasive. It was far more coherent. You could sense the audience was with him. Then it gets to the final statements. You got your final 2 minutes, 3 minutes to wrap up. Bill stands up and gives his testimony. He gives his testimony and invites people to consider Christ. Anthony, A.C. Grayling, gets up and just ridicules him and just mocks him for 3 minutes. And then they had the vote. It was a debate that he voted at the end, and Bill lost that debate by about 2 votes. So on paper, you'd go, what have you done? You've lost the debate. Well, 3 people gave their lives to Christ that night.
Wow.
3 people. because Bill was willing to be mocked and ridiculed and lose the argument on paper because he was playing the bigger game, and he had his eyes on Christ and wanted people to see that. And I remember watching that. I must have been about 35, 40 when that was going on. That was a big lesson to me, because I came away going, oh, hello, I've learned something tonight. Because there's a real art in going, okay, I have all the information to answer this one, but maybe I need to do something a bit different. And that, again, it ties into the suffering question, right? Sometimes it's right to give an intellectual answer. Sometimes it's right to go, look, I could give you a long, rambling answer, but what, do you want us a beer? Because actually what you've been through sounds terrible. And if you just need to sit and tell somebody what you've been through, I'll buy you a beer and I'll listen. And that can be as powerful as going, let me give you my 17-point carefully worked out philosophical argument.
Yeah, that's almost like, I asked you what time it was, not how the watch was built, And
by the way, I was thinking just a moment ago, Jeff, this links into, you mentioned dear old C.S. Lewis, we were talking about earlier, and to go, one reason why I've often asked myself, why is Lewis still quite influential today? Because his writing style is quite dated, right? You said you found him hard going. I think it's because he is so unusual, and he combines those three things. He could engage people's minds. Brilliant philosopher. So he could write books like Mere Christianity that were really kind of quite tight and technical. He could write books that engage the heart. Think of the Screw Tape Letters. That's a heart book. Or
it's funny. I prefer that one over one of my
A Grief Observed.
One of my favorite lines from Screw Tape was, "The subject is becoming truly humble. Well, then make him proud of his humility."
So Lewis could engage the heart, and then he could also engage the imagination. He wrote the Narnia books, he wrote the Cosmic Trilogy, he wrote Till We Have Faces, and so for Lewis to be somebody who could do the heart, the mind, the heart, and the imagination is very, very rare. And I think that's probably why we are still talking about him, even though he died, 1963.
Yeah, and speaking of that, you're connected with the C.S. Lewis Institute out of Chicago, is it? Out of Wheaton?
I am. So the C.S. Lewis Institute are across the country in the USA. Well, actually, they're in the UK now. They're in Scotland, and they're in Northern Ireland, because I'm doing a thing for them in Northern Ireland in about 10 days' time. So for those who don't know that, they grew out of Washington, D.C. I forget when they started, 30 years ago or something, and they are basically a kind of small group, kind of discipleship movements. They get together Christians, often Christians who spend their weeks in the world of work, and it's a 1-year program. It's called the Fellows Program, and you meet together with a cohort of people a bit like you once a month for a year, and you dig into apologetics, you dig into the Bible, you dig a bit of theology and prayer and all kinds of things, and it's basically designed to kind of sharpen you up as a Christian, so that you're really ready to go, out there in the workplace, the university, wherever. And so I've known them for years, because I've got friends who are involved in them. I'm friends with the guy who's now the director. And then actually last year, Jeff, I had the privilege of being in the USA for 3 months. I did a sabbatical over there, and I did a lot of that time I was doing stuff at the C.S. Lewis Institute. I spoke in about 20 kind of locations for them, and in between got in 12 national parks and all kinds of fun USA stuff. We brought the kids over for 3 months, and just
as a
blast.
hiker, yeah. What parks did
I know,
you go
man.
to?
You have an amazing country over there.
Yeah, my son lives in Montana, so we spent some time at Glacier National. Did you get up there?
I did get to Glacier. Yeah. I did. I won't list them all. I mean, the highlight for me, my favorite American national park. I know it's a bit sort of it's everyone's answer, but Yosemite. I love Yosemite, and particularly the upper parts. Tuolumne Meadows at the top is just whatever. My daughter's a mad keen rock climber, so for her, going and standing at the bottom of El Capitan and seeing where Alex Honnold went up in that movie Free Solo, I mean, that was like she dining onto heaven. So we had a blast. And so we like that one. And Bryce Canyon is another one. We went to Bryce and there was snow. So you had the green of you had the white of the snow, the green of the pine trees, and the red of the rock. Oh, it was unbelievable.
So you are very lucky. 3 months and you never called, you never wrote.
I know. Well, I spent 3 months going, I hope I'm not going to bump into Jeff because it wanted to do a podcast.
So to circle back to one of the things we were just talking about discipleship. It's about the heart and the mind, and I think the days of giving just a personal testimony, it may connect with somebody, but I think that taking the time to sit and have coffee or a beer with somebody, and really just trying to find out where, because I think a lot of people, and my father being one of them, was just wounded deeply. Tammy, my wife, when I told her I said I'm a born again Christian, she says, "What does that mean?" I go, "I really don't know. I just heard the term. I don't know what that means." So anyway, she bowed up and got defensive, and I find out that her parents were churchgoers on Sunday and they were abusive Monday through Saturday. So her idea of what a Christian was not a good picture. So until you get to that. And those were those what and why questions come in. Why do you feel that way? And you get to the wound maybe, and get to know people. This is where social media. I made a comment last week. I said, "You think Grok could just go through the social through X and eliminate the ad hominem attack? And just if you took that out of the debate, you'd probably knock off 90% of the conversations on X." But I used to have when I started on X or Twitter, whatever it was, I got out of it really quick because I realized I was good for about 2 engagements, and then it would descend into the name calling, and I just wasn't going to buy into it, And my comment was always, "Are you trying to change my heart and mind because you're going about it the wrong way?" Calling me a douchebag is, it may make you feel better, but it really doesn't move the discussion any farther. And I had one guy who was an apostate, really smart guy. I could tell in the 2 or 3 volleys. He was raised in the church, very steep, very knowledgeable of the Bible. And my last comment to him was, "I believe what I believe because I believe it to be true." And he said, "Preach it, brother." And I never heard from him again. And yeah, and I found that interesting. I didn't get to the point, why did you walk away? What happened? That you would be steeped into this, take the time to learn it, and because it's not a scientific argument. You know that. I mean, you can't look at the human genome and think for a second that just came about. There has to be a mind behind it at some point.
Well, exactly. I mean, a couple of things there. I mean, the first thing is, I think you're right. I have come across so many people like you who, when you dig into it, that excavating the wound, or the way you phrased it, there's been a bad experience, either with a genuine Christian who's done something really stupid, or they've come across a sort of weak, watered down version of something done in the name of Christianity. What I find interesting, though, is when Jesus comes into this, because I remember a few years ago now, I was speaking out in Vancouver when I lived in Canada, at a conference, and I was then sitting outside when it was a session that wasn't one of mine, drinking coffee, and then one of the sound guys came out to speak to me and said, "Oh, have you got a moment?" And we got chatting, and basically, although he was working at a Christian event, the company wasn't a Christian one, and then he talked about the fact that he had been a Christian and walked away. So, like you described there, I've always learned to go, you don't jump on them. You go, "Oh, that's really interesting. Would you mind telling me your story?" And his story was, he'd grown up in a very fundamentalist church, where everything was, if you asked a question, you got shouted down. The pastor says it, so it's true, and so forth. He got to like 19, 20, had enough, walked away, jacked the whole thing in, then went and joined up with the local atheist group to hang out with a bunch of other skeptics. And he goes to me, he said, "They were as bad. They were also fundamentalists. If you dare to question any of their authors, if you dare to say, well, actually, I don't agree with Richard Dawkins on everything, they would, be rude about you and belittle you." And so he said, so I left.
Yeah, I said,
where are you now?
Yeah.
And he said, looked at me and go, "Andy, that's what I want to ask you. I just don't know. I don't think I fit in the church. I don't fit in with the secular people. What do I do?" And I remember looking at him, Jeff, and going, I said, "Oh, mate, this is awful. I can understand you feeling all over the place." But I said, "Look, can I ask you a question? You've talked about the church and fundamentalism and all those things, and I agree with 99.9% of what you said, but you haven't mentioned Jesus. Where does Jesus fit into this?" And Jeff, it was really interesting. He looks at me and he goes, "Well, that's a good question." He said, I actually quite miss him."
Wow.
That was his answer. I remember looking at him and saying, okay, that's a good starting point. Why don't you sit down and crack open the Bible of an evening with a coffee or a beer, whatever, doesn't matter, Jesus doesn't mind. Start with the gospel of Mark, read it through slowly at your own speed. And as you go, pray and go, "God, I don't know what to think about you, quite frankly, but I want to know. And would you show me who you really are?" And then I was also able to hook him up with a pastor friend of mine who had a group that used to meet with Starbucks once a week. They called it St. Arbucks. It was his church at Starbucks, and it was full of waifs and strays. So it was great because I was able to connect this guy with my mate who was a pastor in Vancouver, who said, "Yeah, send him along. I have 20 of these guys on a Sunday morning, and we just sit around and read the Bible and talk about what we see, and see what happens." But yeah, the Jesus thing really interested me. So I often come across people who had a real issue with the church, but sometimes underneath it, there's still that attraction to Jesus. And if we can reintroduce people and say, can we just put the church thing to one side and perhaps get you and Jesus chatting again and then see what happens?
Yeah, my daughter-in-law was the same thing. She got hooked up early as a young woman with a church that said her hair wasn't long enough. And that was my response was like, come on, that has nothing to do with Jesus. And that's kind of what I told her. I said, why don't you seek Jesus and then leave all the other stuff?
It's just things like that. Just the funny thing is, to lighten it slightly, one of the funniest stories I've heard, I had a friend of mine some years ago who was from Northern Ireland, went to a very, very conservative church in Belfast. And then she and her friend one day turned up for church without any head coverings on. We're told you cannot come in. You can't come in without head covering. You can't come in without your head covered. So they went away. Following week, they came back with comedy headgear. She'd got a baseball cap with a rubber axe embedded in it. And the other one had a Viking helmet. And it turned out, she said, actually, not all head coverings are created equal because we were permanently banned. Praise the Lord, Claire's still a Christian. But it was like it was touch and go.
That's very funny. It's funny. My first thought of a Belfast church was, did they have a class on bomb making? But that's
there you go. So I like that. Politically incorrect. Let's go
politically incorrect. So you're going to come back to the States in July.
I am. So yeah, so the C.S. Lewis Institute, who we mentioned earlier, well, this goes back to when you and I met. You and I met, didn't we, at a summer school at Wheaton College. So the organization I was working for back in the day was an organization now that you mention it. It doesn't exist anymore. Reputation was in tatters. It was called Ravi Zacharias Ministries. It was an amazing group of people, but the guy who led it had a spectacular moral failing. The whole thing came to an end. Praise the Lord, I left kind of 5 years before any of that stuff, but very sad. But they used to do these amazing summer schools.
Very sad because it was a very profound and effective ministry.
It's very sad what happened. But we met at their summer school at Wheaton because you used to come along and do various things, including stand-up comedy for us. But what was interesting, when ours had unfolded, we had loads of people who used to come to those summer schools, would reach out to myself and other former team members and go, "Oh, we miss them. They were amazing times to come together and learn and just build community." And then the C.S. Lewis Institute, who now have picked up some of the old RSM staff, about 3 or 4 people working for C.S. Lewis Institute, had the vision of going, well, why don't we try and restart something? So it's not at Wheaton, it's at a school not far from there. In July, they are having their first summer school. So it's a 5-day thing. If I send you the link, you can stick it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll stick it in the show notes. In July,
yeah, it'd be great.
11th, I think you said July.
It's great.
11th.
We're aiming for about 70 or 80 people, and it's going to be, I think, 5 days of really nice mixture of teaching and Q&A and discussing together, just hanging out with like-minded people, with the goal that you go back feeling empowered and equipped. And the theme really is, how do we bring, I think this year's theme, I've got the title quite right, but the whole idea is, how do we bring hope to a world in chaos? I mean, everything is in chaos, right? Politics is in chaos, the economy is in chaos, the environment is in chaos. Everywhere you look, it seems the world's gone mad. And it's easy as Christians to either run away from that or shout at it. And I think as Christians, we're called to do something different. We're called to bring hope into those places. So we're thinking together this year, as a bunch of us, how do we do that? What does that look like in your workplace, in your school, in your family? How can you be someone who brings hope into really troubled places?
Yeah, that's what I see. I had been there in my life. That what's it all about? What's the pointlessness of life? I mean, by the time Christ got me, I was a full-blown nihilist. So I understand that mindset. I can remember Tammy shaking me. You don't care. We're losing the house. And I go, I don't. I'm trying. I want to, but I just don't understand why any of it matters. So I see that in a lot of young men at the airport, just looking at their devices, and it's just almost like this thing that emanates from their soul, and you want to walk over and give them a hug and go, there's another answer.
Something worth living for.
I've always admired people. I've seen this. We were talking about it in our small group. We do small group at our house on Tuesdays, and honoring that voice inside of us. God will move us, but I used to say it would be a lot easier in my life if God spoke to me in a Spanish accent, then I know it was Him. Hola,
That's
Jeff.
excellent.
Yeah, hola, Jeff. Okay, it's you, Lord. I got you. But I've seen people, getting on an airplane more than once where a woman will stop or a man will stop and look at the flight attendant and go, God just put it on my heart that you need prayer. Do you want me? Can I pray for you? And more than once, you see the tears well up in their eyes, and they say some family member is just going in for surgery or whatever today. But honoring that inner voice, to step out of your comfort zone. It's easy to go to the holy huddle and just sit there and be around like-minded people, whether you're an atheist or whether you're a Bible-believing Christian or whether you're a spiritualist or whatever. It's easy to just sit around with like-minded people. And I think the social media helps call all those people together. So you're always getting what do they call it? Confirmation bias. You're always getting the confirmation bias. And I think the calling from God, but I think the nervousness, what I love about the book you wrote, it gives you a tool. You don't have to be a scholar, and you don't have to be, if your heart is pure and you're working from a motive of just, I want to share with you one of the most profound things that have ever happened to me. I mean, I understand pain. We all, especially, I'm 70 years old. I've had pain and suffering in my life. When Tammy went through cancer, I remember friends of hers going, "How could you believe in a God that would allow this?" She goes, "I couldn't get through this without that relationship." There's a sense of peace and calm that came with knowing that this isn't. She felt people laid hands on her and prayed, and one night she said to me, she goes, I heard from Him. It's not going to be fatal. And 25 years ago. So, but that peace that comes with that. So my question is, what's the difference between sharing your faith and sounding like a malfunctioning salesman at a mall kiosk?
Oh, what a brilliant question. Or I suppose in today's day and age, sounding like a really sort of low-grade version of ChatGPT,
right?
Where you're just kind of spitting the answers out. I think we've partly touched on this, Jeff. Like the big idea in that book was if we can be leaning more into the whole question thing, rather than thinking, what is the one-liner I should be using with my friend here? Because if I use this magic one-liner, suddenly they'll become a Christian. And, God can work that way, but doesn't often choose to work that way in my experience. If we're instead thinking, what's the right question I could ask here? How can I crack this conversation open? And do you know one thing that's interesting about doing that I've reflected on over the years? I think sometimes we don't trust God enough, which is that we say we do as Christians, but that we try and control all the variables. We try and manipulate conversations and like play games with our friends that, we say this thing, they got to say that thing. Our prepackaged little testimonies and whatever. Once you start asking questions and allowing the other person to speak up, oh gosh, now it's risky because who knows where it's going to go. But if you trust God, you don't have to worry. You can say, well, I'm going to ask my friend this question that I think is the obvious question, and I'm now going to, while they're speaking, I'll pray quietly and trust the Holy Spirit that I'll either say something wise, or if not, I can say something at least friendly. And I think, particularly in early days of evangelism, if you're sharing your faith with friends, family, neighbors, colleagues, an early win is your friend going away going, I enjoyed that conversation. I went for a sandwich with my workmate who's a Christian, and we talked about family and a bit about spirituality, and he talked about his church a bit. And do you know what? It wasn't weird. It was fun. And actually, do you know what? I wouldn't mind doing that again. Rather than they went for lunch with you and you just like threw apologetic arguments at them for half an hour. And like maybe you score a win, but more likely they're going to go, well, I'm not going to talk to that loony again. So yeah, maybe it's something about learning that question conversational kind of approach so we can begin just opening conversations up and being more natural. I think a big a big win in evangelism is behaving naturally rather than weirdly.
And the goal may be being more than one conversation,
Yeah,
rather than just doing
more than one conversation.
a hit
And
piece,
also the humility. The other thing as well, it takes humility, right? Is going, you may not be the guy or the girl who gets over the line.
Right.
Maybe God wants you to start a conversation with a taxi driver next time you're on your Uber or whatever, Jeff, and that's only going to go so far. But then God knows in a week's time that guy's going to bump into someone at the bar who's going to pick it up and go a bit further, and then it's going to be a whole series of things. And most of us, if we look back, I don't know about you, I look back and go, my coming to faith in Christ, there were multiple people involved. There was my mum and dad, there was my youth leader, there were friends, probably 7, 8, 9, 10 key people. And that's often the case for most of us. Very rarely is it a person goes from like complete atheist to Christian because they have one encounter with somebody.
Yeah, with me,
it was
the Bible, a year and a half.
One person plants, one person waters, one person harvests. So just relax. And if God tends to use you to plant seeds and other people harvest them, that's okay because it's not a competition.
Right. Yeah. With me, it was a year and a half friendship.
Right.
And my question inside all the time was, why does he care? He would say, I pray for your marriage. Why? Well, we believe marriages are ordained from God. And he didn't put you two together to breed children and then for one of you to move on. Those children need two parents, and all of that, And my question was always, why does this guy, he was everything I wasn't. I was loud, obnoxious, foul-mouthed, cynical. And I watched the way he treated his wife and the way he treated his family and the way he lived his life. And there was a kind of an aroma to it that was appealing to me as a man who was not any of those things. So sometimes it's just a life well lived is your apologetic, just be the one thing in a person's life that's full of chaos and uncertainty, and just be the one thing that looks certain and not chaotic,
I think so, and I think that also means that for people listening to this who are sitting thinking, well, even the question thing, I'm not that good with words, because not everyone's the same, right? You and I, words are our business, but not everyone finds words easy. If you start thinking about how can I care for people and show people their values, that opens up interesting possibilities. Like I got a friend of mine who, works for a local government office in part of the country, and his evangelistic strategy for years has been to be praying every day for opportunities to just show random acts of kindness to people. Like if someone's having a bad day, leave a gift of chocolate on their desk. Wash up all the coffee cups without being asked. Look for those kind of things, and then people notice and they'll say, "What's different?" And he said, then the scary bit comes because you don't duck it. Then you go, "Well, I did that because I'm a Christian." And I believe in a God who loves me unconditionally. And so I try and sometimes demonstrate that in my personal relationships. He said some people look a bit weird, but if you've just done something nice for them and you consistently do nice things to people, he said, then people start going, okay, tell me about this Jesus thing, because I don't get it, but clearly there is something about you. And I think it was him I owe the point, actually, that, that famous line of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, where Jesus said, you're the salt of the earth to Christians. In the ancient world, salt was a preservative. So salt had to be in contact with the thing it was trying to preserve. So Christians, we need to be in there with our friends and our colleagues, at the gym, at the sports club, and the workplace and whatever, mixing with people and then praying that God gives us those opportunities to show what it is like to be different. And then people are going to be far more willing to listen to your words if they've seen the actions.
Yeah, I agree 100% what do they say? Live it, use words if necessary, but live.
Well, that's a misquote. If you read on in my book, you'll get to that, because that's often attributed to Francis of Assisi, but he actually never said it.
Oh, really? But, I love. Where did it come from then? A bumper sticker?
We don't know, but
in the UK,
it got hung around his neck. But actually, it's really interesting because he was a guy who did lots of acts of compassion, but he's also famous for being a preacher. He would walk into the society parties of his day and stand there and preach against the rich people who were trampling on the poor. So Francis was pretty capable of going for it when he wanted, but he was also somebody who also was known for compassion and care, whether it's for human beings or animals. I think, Jeff, I've got a theory, and I talk about this, you'll find this later on in the book, that sometimes those of us who are a bit more nervous, and I was nervous. I mean, I come across as loud and confident, but I'm a shy extrovert. I'm an unusual mix.
A shy extrovert.
Which means, you're great when you've got a platform, but put me in a room of strangers, I hide. But that quote, the danger of that quote, it gives people a get out of jail free card, because they can go, well, I don't need to say anything. I just need to be kind. And the problem is, if you're just kind to someone, like my friend Steve, if he just left the chocolate, if he just made the coffee and said nothing, all people are going to do is they're going to go, oh, Steve's a nice bloke. And he's drawn attention to himself and increased his reputation. And no one's ever made the connection to Jesus. So you've got to make the connection to Jesus, and it might be scary to do it. But again, trust me, if you've just been kind and nice and generous to somebody is going to be much more open to listen to you, at least tell you why that you're doing that in the name of Christ, than if you've spent the previous half an hour being rude and negative and cynical.
Yeah, it's funny. I did a lot of work years ago with an organization called World Vision. And,
yes.
I wanted to go down. I said, before I get involved with you, I want to make sure the kids that I'm sponsoring are actual children, and they're not just a picture you took or whatever. So Tammy and I flew down to Nicaragua along with a group of other people, and we got to meet the children. And it was interesting, the conversation Tammy had with the mother of one of the girls that we sponsored. And I looked over at one point, and they were hugging and crying together, two moms, And when we got in the van to go back to the hotel, I said to Tam, what was that all about? And she said, her daughter that morning, the mother said that when I was a little girl, I went to my father and I said, I want to be a nurse. And her father said, get over it. You were born in poverty. You're going to live in poverty. You're going to die in poverty. So get over the notion that you could ever become anything. And that morning on the way to meet us, her daughter said to her, she was probably 8 or 9 years old, said to her, I want to be a nurse. And the mother said to her, because of this organization and the people we're going to meet today, you can be whatever you want. And the question was always, why are you doing this? World Vision used to go in, most of evangelical charities would go into these third world places and then just hammer them over the head with, you need Jesus, you need Jesus, you need Jesus. And at some point they came to the realization that, you know what, we just need to be kind and elevate their life. And then they'll ask, why are you doing this? Well, because our Lord and Savior has basically commanded us to do this, and then you can tell them about this man Jesus, and it resonates because they've seen it. They have a reference point. And my wife is interested. About a year ago, she's 65, so 64 years old. We've been walking with Jesus for over 30 years. She said, Jeff, I think I finally understand it. That my Heavenly Father loves me. And I said, really? She goes, my earthly father did so much damage to me that it was so hard to really get in my heart that there was a father out there that could love me unconditionally. And it's heartbreaking to hear that, but it's also what a great revelation. That she can now live the rest of her days knowing that she is loved unconditionally, by our Heavenly Father. And that is just a wonderful message to give to a hurting world, that because it's the history and the wounds go deep, and discipleship is not a one and done. It's not. I believe it's it's at Starbucks, it's at the pub, it's at the wherever, and people are watching. People are watching, and that's what's hard for me because I'm a golfer, and I hold all my profanity for those 18 holes.
I wasn't going to say a word. I could guess where this was going.
Yeah, I said if you followed me on the golf course, you wouldn't think that I had a peace that surpasses all understanding. But
well, the nice thing is you could say to people, you can say, if you want to see what I was like before I became a Christian, think of the golf course across the entire of life.
Right, entirety.
I've been doing a work, and now it's just on the 18 holes. So
yeah, when you're in a place in your life when your eyes open in the morning and you go, crap, another day, you're not in a good place. You're not in a good place. Andy Bannister, I think we told you we would do an hour, so we'd want to tie you up for all day. Let me ask you this. What would you say to the average Christian who loves Jesus deeply but is terrified of looking stupid when faith comes up in a conversation? What kind of, again, it does, you don't want to take an apologetics class at the university. You don't want
No,
to,
you don't need to take an apologetics class at university. I mean, obviously, you need to read that bright yellow book called How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot.
And we will have that in the show notes. So,
oh, that's amazing, Jeff.
Yeah.
I'd say a couple of things. Firstly, I want to encourage you and go, you're not alone. Because one of the things that you often think, because I was there, my first job when I worked for the hospital, I remember spending 6 years feeling utterly inadequate and terrified. And I wish I'd known that actually it's quite normal. So, it's not unusual to feel that is the first thing. Secondly, though, it's interesting one of the things I took a bit longer to work through, Jeff, was realizing, our fears, there's the side we do need to lean into is our fears can also expose where our idols are, right? The thing, if you're afraid about something, or if you're afraid of losing something, that thing matters too much to you. So if you're afraid of losing a particular standard of living, be a little bit careful, because actually now that's become the be all and end all. And if afraid of looking a bit silly, could it just be the case that, sort of a nice, comfortable middle-class lifestyle where everything's nice and comfortable has actually become God to you? In which case, maybe the next step is to go into your room in private and pray to your Heavenly Father and go, Lord, I'm really sorry that maybe that fear isn't just nervousness. Maybe things are too easy. Could you shake me up a little bit? And that's a dangerous prayer to pray.
Wow.
And then the next thing I would also do when praying is pray that, Lord, I want to be bolder. Can you create some opportunities for me? Because one of the things we get tied up in knots is, how do I create opportunities for faith-based conversations? And if you go, I'm not going to try and force them, I'm going to pray and ask God to do it. And if he doesn't do it today, that's all right. I asked, he didn't do it. So clearly it wasn't the day he wanted it. But then when it comes up to go, well, I prayed this morning at breakfast, this would happen. And now this person, like at the bus stop or at work, has said to me, you're a Christian, what's all that about then? Well, maybe I probably want to go for it. And then the last thought I'd throw into the loop there is, remember, it's not all about you. We talked about this. Sometimes we can think, and this is one of the lies the enemy likes to whisper into your ear. We're into screw tape territory, right? Of going, if you screw it up and you don't get it right and you phrase it slightly badly and it could have gone better, that this person is damned for eternity and it's your fault. God doesn't work that way. To go, unless you are a complete jerk and an ass and really outrageously rude, the worst you'll do is have someone going away going, well, that wasn't the world's greatest answer. And then you can always go, like, I'm sorry, there are better answers than that one I've given. If that question you asked me really matters to you, like you said earlier on, would you give me a week, 10 days? Because I know there are people who are better than me, and I'll do my best to help you out. Most people, if you do that with a smile and you're willing to sort of, humble yourself and self-deprecate a bit and take one on the chin, most people are going to go, yeah, go on then. Yeah, I'd love to see what you've got. Let's talk later. So yeah, those four bits of advice together, I would say to anyone listening to this going, I can't do it. You can. And God can work. God can work through totally useless evangelists, is my experience, both personally and through history.
Yeah, that's great. I brought back a memory. Back in 2000, we were pitching studios for a sitcom pilot. And one of the guys that we were pitching had met me in New York years earlier when I was an angry, bitter guy. And we were sitting there, and at one point he says, are you some kind of Christian or something? And I said, well, since you brought it up, yeah, actually. And, in Hollywood, you don't walk with that on your sleeve,
Yeah.
Anyway, he says, how did that happen? And I look at my manager, and they go, tell him. So I do my 5-minute elevator testimony, and it was still new to me. I mean, I'm crying, it was so profound. And I got tears, anything. And he looks at me, he shrugs his shoulders and goes, I don't get it. Okay, what's the show idea? And we're walking out, and my manager says to me, what the heck was that? And I go, I don't know, but I'll tell you this, who knows? Maybe 10 years from now, he's on the hills in Hollywood with a gun in his mouth.
And suddenly that comes back.
And that story comes back. I said, it's not my domain. My job is to be honest and true with what he's done for me. And
also, by the way, I think the other thing in that story that I reflect on hearing that, Jeff, is that there's something about, for us guys, we're not very good at going, that story moved me. we're quite good at someone tells a moving story, and as a guy, your natural response to go, "Oh, okay, right now the sport." It doesn't mean you aren't interested. It means you're not willing to admit that you're interested.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
sometimes
just
plant
like the
seed
shoulder shrug.
and then move on.
The shoulder shrug.
Yeah.
You know,
The shoulder shrug.
okay.
And
okay.
sometimes,
yeah, didn't do anything for me. Okay.
Yeah,
but at least kind enough to listen, didn't interrupt me, you know, and
I've had experiences of saying stuff to people and you think nothing's affected them, and you hear years after someone say, "Hey, you know, what you said that time was really helped me. Thank you." But
absolutely.
And you think, "I wish you'd said that at the time, not 10 years later."
Yeah. But again, to all the listeners out there, you know, we are called to step out and maybe get out of our comfort zone, and whatever that looks like for you. You know, just having a cup of coffee with somebody and listening to their story. You know, and then if you get Andy's book, when you get to the what and why questions, so important to ask those questions. Jesus was very, very clear. You know, with the most famous one is probably you know, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, whose image is on the coin. You know, and I had heard it also. You know, it would have been nice if Jesus had asked whose image is on your heart. We are image bearers, and I think we need to reflect that the best we can. And you know, with this culture that we live in today is so divisive. But I was so encouraged to hear that in the UK, the young people are seeking. You know, and that's where it begins. God can move. God can move great with an open mind and an open heart. So if you're listening today and you have questions, there are answers, and there are people out there. And but you go to a church and you ask a question, and they tell you don't ask questions. Find another church. There are churches out there where people welcome the questions, and they have the answers. But the answer is Jesus, and Jesus alone can change your heart and your mind. Andy Bannister, thank you so much. For
Jeff Allen, thank you.
Time. And we'll be in touch because you can run, but you can't hide, man. I know how to get a hold of you now. I'm
going to be very afraid. Very afraid now. But no, we must do this again, and sooner than the last gap we had.
Yeah.
And amazingly, this time you remember to press the record button, which is
well, I didn't do it. Christian, our production guy over there. Yeah. Again, where you're inadequate, you find people that can do the.
That's exactly it. Find people who know how to press a start button.
Pushing that button was just so difficult for me. So God bless you, man. And your kids now, they got to be growed, man. Because when we talked last year, they were little. And
my kiddos, they are growing. Yeah, my daughter's 13 and a half and my son is 11. So it's they're big, man.
Wow.
That kind of thing. But parenthood's great. Every year, right, is fantastic because every age is different. So it's they're a fun age right now. So but they keep me on my toes.
Any skeptics in there or
No, it's interesting, isn't it? With your own kids, you watch what's going on. So we're very blessed at the moment. They're very open. They love going to church. They remind me of what I was like at that age. I don't think the penny has fully dropped on what it means for this to be my faith rather than mum and dad's faith. But there's no pushback, there's no challenge. They're both thinkers. So we trust. But, you know, it's every parent's prayer if you're a Christian, right, that your kids are going to follow the Lord.
Absolutely.
Kind of thing. And we're a great church they love going to. So I mean, that we're blessed by that on a Sunday morning, our kids are like, if we were to go, let's sleep in, they'll go, no, we're going to church. Got to go to church, Dad. It's great.
Man, that's great. Well, God bless you, man, and the work you do.
And you too.
And we'll talk. We'll be in touch.
Fantastic.
All right. Bye-bye.